Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the CARES conference, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today. I want to extend my gratitude to all those of you who have participated in making the CARES conference great year after year, and for all your hard work, thank you. I want to talk about a topic that I think is really exciting and important today. It's new medications on the horizon, and there's so much going on in glaucoma that's really important and that is potentially impactful for patients. But I think in terms of that which is on the near horizon and likely to make a big difference for a broad group of people, the possibilities of new medications to contribute to the betterment of glaucoma patients is real and exciting. So let's talk a little bit about new medications. I won't bury the lead. I'll tell you right off the bat that the answers we want the most are the hardest to get in the early stages of drug development. So does a drug work well? What are the side effects? How much is that drug going to cost? Will it be affordable for me? Those are sometimes the most important aspects of making a decision about whether or not to use a glaucoma medication. However, as drugs are being developed and then progressing through the FDA clinical trials process, it is very difficult to get the answers to some of those important questions. Only when they get to the stages where a significant amount of evidence has been developed on those products and where they are released by the FDA will we really get to know just how much those drugs will help our patients and in whom they will be right for using. So let's talk a little bit first about the history of glaucoma medicines. It's amazing that in terms of brand new classes of medicines, the last one that was released in 1996 when Zalatan came out. So more than 20 years has passed since a totally novel class of medications was released. And Zalatan you may also know by the generic name latanoprost. Over the intervening period, there have been medications that combine previously approved products like Cosopt, which came out in 1998 and is now generic, Combigan in 2007, and Simbrinza in 2013. But those are mixtures of medicines that already existed. In order to really understand what's going on with products that are out there in the glaucoma pipeline, you have to understand something about the FDA process for drug approval. So I'm going to go through the steps that we take and then tell you about the medications and where they are in the FDA approval process. So the US FDA is our main watchdog, and more specifically, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research is the arm of the FDA that's responsible for evaluating new drugs before they can be sold. And they help provide us with the information we need to make decisions about whether the medications are appropriate. So drug companies that are seeking to sell a medication in the United States have to go through a development process and apply for approval from CDER, which is a division of the US FDA. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about that drug approval process. So once a compound is identified that may ultimately help patients, that drug is developed to the extent that it can be tested on animals. And if the results in animals look promising in terms of the effectiveness and the safety of the medication, then ultimately an application can be filed with the US FDA as an investigational new drug, an IND application. And that IND application alerts the FDA that there is a potentially beneficial product and that product needs to go through a process of testing to determine whether it is appropriate to release and to use in the general population. There are different phases of clinical trials that occur once an IND, that investigational new drug application, has been submitted. The first phase that occurs after that is really the third step in the process beyond the initial development and the animal testing. And it occurs the testing of the medication in normal, healthy volunteers to get a sense for whether the medication is actually safe to try. Once those phase 1 studies are complete, the drug progresses to phase 2. The phase 2 studies are generally bigger, and they're used to test the drug in comparison to something else, like a placebo or another available medication, in order to determine if that drug actually functions well and is effective. If the drug is determined to be both potentially safe and potentially effective, then large-scale phase 3 clinical trials begin. The numbers grow significantly, so we could be talking about thousands of patients involved in these clinical trials. And usually phase 3 studies, there are multiple studies that take place during phase 3. And then we further refine our information about safety and effectiveness of the medication. So getting to phase 3 is really a critical step. and fundamental for the next step. And these steps start at the bottom of this slide. Once the phase 3 information is gathered, then the drug company can meet with the FDA to review the phase 3 information in preparation for submitting an NDA. An NDA is a new drug application, and that's really when it gets exciting, because once a drug has passed phase 3 and the NDA has been submitted to the FDA, there is a law that says the FDA has a specific window of time in which to make a decision on whether or not that drug can be approved or may be rejected. And that's called PDUFA, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, which that law was passed to say that companies do have to contribute to paying for the approval process, but also that a specific window of time will be set forth. So basically the way it works is once the NDA is filed, there's a 60-day potential review period, and then a decision must be made 10 months after that. Some drugs are fast-tracked, and the decision may be made within 6 months. So from NDA to approval should take no more than 1 year. Once the application, the NDA, is reviewed, if the drug is ultimately approved, then labeling is decided. So one thing that's important when learning about new medications, which are in the FDA clinical approval process, is that the names they are given, the brand names, may ultimately change once the drug is formally labeled. They don't want to have duplicate names or names that are confusing or misleading. So sometimes we refer to the drugs as they're in development by a particular name, but that name may ultimately change. And then there is a post-approval process by which additional information is gathered, and that's called phase 4. So once the drug is out there, it's marketed, an additional review takes place to make sure that there are not side effects that emerge as being problematic when the drug is used in a much greater number of people. The estimates for how much it costs to push a drug through the FDA approval process here in the U.S. are variable. But Tufts University created a study in which they looked at the average cost to push drugs through, and they estimated that an average cost to go from development all the way to approval might be $1.4 billion. So these are significant endeavors. Let's talk a little bit about what's out there in the FDA pipeline for glaucoma. The first drug I want to talk about is Vyzulta, which is called latanoprostene bunod. That's the general name for it. Vyzulta is a brand name, and Vyzulta is actually an example of one of those drugs where the name, which was originally thought to be Vesnio, got changed to the brand name Vyzulta. Trabodenazon is another drug that's out there in clinical trials. Ropasa and Rakatan are drugs that are out there in clinical trials. Rakatan is basically a combination of Ropasa and latanoprost, and we'll talk about each of these in more specifics. Let's start with Vyzulta. So Vyzulta is sort of like latanoprost, but with an extra kick. It has an additional novel mechanism that's called nitric oxide or nitrous oxide donating. And what studies have shown is that that particular mechanism may help improve flow through the eye's native drainage apparatus. And the drains inside the eye aren't like pipes. They're a living network of tissue, as you can see by this graphic. This is a drawing of the drains inside the eye, and it shows that the drains inside the eye function more like a meshwork, like a living network. And it's thought that the additional mechanism in Vyzulta may actually improve outflow through this traditional outflow pathway. There is another pathway that's accessory to this that's stimulated by latanoprost, already an approved medication. So combining these mechanisms may ultimately improve outflow and reduce pressure, and this would be a once-daily drop. So let's work through the timeline to get some information about where this drug is in the approval process. Back in July of 2015, the NDA, the new drug application for latanoprostene bunod, which became Vyzulta, was originally submitted to the FDA. The FDA completed their review a few months later and accepted the drug for study and gave a PDUFA date of July 2016, meaning the date at which a decision would be rendered as to whether the drug was approved or not approved. If we fast forward then to July, two important things happened. The first is that the phase 3 clinical trial results for Vyzulta were published in the American Journal of Ophthalmology, and they indicated that patients who were using Vyzulta got a little bit more pressure lowering on average than the patients who were just using latanoprost. But also that same month, the FDA produced a complete response letter indicating that the drug was not approved for use. The approval was not denied because of the drug itself. There were no efficacy or safety concerns. However, there was a concern about the manufacturing process and the facilities. So they went back to the drawing board in terms of creating a manufacturing process and verifying the manufacturing process in a way that was satisfactory to the FDA. And they resubmitted in February of 2017. In March, the FDA responded with a new PDUFA date, the date for a decision, of August 24th, 2017. So Vyzulta may be the first new medication of this group that is actually FDA approved for use. Hopefully the manufacturing processes will be satisfactorily reviewed and approved, and the drug will become available sometime later this year. Let's talk about Ropasa. Ropasa is also called Notarsadil, but it's a ROCK inhibitor, and that's a totally new class of medications. So this totally new class of medications as a standalone may be the first one that actually emerges since latanoprost or Xalatan was approved in 1996. This drug relaxes the native drainage apparatus, that meshwork, that network of tissue, and lowers intraocular pressure, and also is once-a-day dose. Here's the timeline for Ropasa. So in June of 2016, enrollment was completed in Rocket-4, which is a phase 3 clinical trial. For Ropasa, the phase 3 clinical trials are called the Rocket trials. And you'll see for Rakatan, a similar product, we will talk about that next, that they're called Mercury trials. So for the Rocket-4, it's the fourth phase 3 clinical trial the company underwent, and the drug and all the enrollment for that drug trial was completed back in June of 2016. In September of 2016, an NDA, or a new drug application, was filed with the FDA. And in October, positive results from the 3-month time window of Rocket-4 was released and reported. In October of 2016, the NDA was actually withdrawn, and it's possible it was withdrawn after the Vyzulta experience in order to make sure that a third-party manufacturing partner was ready to answer all the FDA's questions and satisfactorily demonstrate the manufacturing process was up to FDA standards. With additional time to work on that manufacturing process and prepare for the FDA review, the NDA was refiled in March of this year, and positive 6-month results from Rocket-4 were released in April of 2017. So we hope that Ropasa's approval decision will come sometime in the spring of 2018. Rocklatan is Notarsadil, or Ropasa, combined with latanoprost. And you may notice that many of you who have glaucoma or have a relative or friend who has glaucoma, that they're taking latanoprost, or you're taking latanoprost, because that's the most common first-line agent in this country for glaucoma. There are combination medications, but none of them currently include latanoprost. And though latanoprostine bunod, Vyzulta, is sort of a combination of latanoprost plus, the Rocklatan, or Notarsadil and latanoprost, is also a combination of latanoprost plus this totally novel class of medications, the ROCK inhibitors. And it's possible that this new combination medicine may make it easy for patients who are already on latanoprost to progress to being on one bottle of medicine and getting both latanoprost and something else. Same may be true for Vyzulta. As far as Rocklatan goes, the mechanism is similar, that it's supplementing the mechanism of latanoprost, an accessory drainage mechanism, with the mechanism of Ropasa, which works on the native drainage pathway, and it also is intended to lower eye pressure. Here's the time frame on Rocklatan. We talked about the Ropasa studies are the Rocket studies, the Rocklatan studies are the Mercury studies, and in March of this year, Mercury 2, the second phase 3 clinical trial, started enrolling patients. Mercury 1 completed its enrollment in March of 2016. Mercury 2 began. In May of 2016, Mercury 1 completed its enrollment. In September of 2016, Mercury 1, that first phase 3 trial, reported successful months at the 3-month time window. And in December of 2016, Mercury 2 completed its enrollment. Now we're in 2017, and there's a Mercury 3 trial that's expected to commence in Europe that's not intended for U.S. registration trials, but to help with registration in Europe. So another medication that's on the horizon is travodenazine. This uses a totally different mechanism than the others we've discussed and those that are available. It works on stimulating something called an adenosine receptor, and that's believed to lead to remodeling of the native drains in the eye and also to lowering of eye pressure. Travodenazine, back in July of 2015, Inotech met with the FDA regarding the end of its Phase 2 and in preparation for Phase 3 trials. In October of 2015, the first Phase 3 trial began dosing patients. And in August of 2016, it completed its enrollment. But in January of 2017, the results were reported, and they did not show that travodenazine was superior to placebo at all time points tested. It lowered eye pressure, and it did so with relatively few side effects, but it didn't do it as well as timolol, and it was not statistically superior to placebo at all time points. It's important to note that in studies, what we're analyzing is statistics on large groups of patients. And so it'll be interesting to see if additional studies emerge on travodenazine that give us a better window into the drug's profile and how effective it might be and whether some of this information changes. But it remains to be seen what happens with travodenazine going forward. So in conclusion, there are multiple drugs that are in the FDA clinical process. They are in the process of soliciting approval and also of soliciting patients in some cases. And that's very exciting because at the point where we get to Phase 3, at the point where we get to NDAs being filed, then we know that we may have, at a specific time window, new drugs that emerge. So it may be that Vyzulta gets approval later this year, and it may be ultimately that Ropasa gets approval in the spring, but we just have to wait to see. The approval process is challenging, it's expensive, and it's important. We want to make sure that the drugs are safe and effective before they are used in our patient population. And also, what we really need to judge whether these medications are going to help us is detailed information about just how effective they are and what circumstances they're effective, and also about their side effects. And that's information that we don't really have just yet. There are indicators about effectiveness and side effects, but we need to wait until we really have a complete set of information about the medications in order to judge just how useful they are, though certainly potentially exciting. And once the drug's approved, then we have to gain experience with whether it's right for our patients. And also, only when it's approved will we figure out whether or not it's also picked up by insurers and just what these drugs might cost, because they're going to be brand name only until their patents expire and they become generic. And sometimes the cost of the medication can be a big barrier to using it. So I think that there's a lot of exciting developments about new medications. These medications are on the horizon. There is real change that is possible even within the 1-year time frame. But we just have to wait and see what the evidence shows and the decisions that are ultimately rendered by the FDA. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here, even if not in person, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.